Okay, my guys, my early class, congratulate yourselves. You have made it to the end of the term. Good job, good job. This is the last lecture. Literally congratulate yourselves. Clap. Okay, good, good, good. So just a reminder that we won't be meeting here on Tuesday, but there will be a question and answer session next Wednesday in the morning. I will be there, Professor Sharon will be there. And you can bring questions to us if you like. You can also continue to post questions on the discussion board. And as another reminder, I yesterday dropped a bunch more practice questions for you. I put them on the Cycle 11 tab, but some of the questions have to do with Cycle 11 stuff, with like rates of population growth, logistic model, exponential model. Some of them have to do with phylogenies. So lots of opportunities for practice on those cycles. Today, for the last lecture of the class, we will largely be focusing on the idea of the Anthropocene. That is the idea that we are now perhaps entering into a new period, a period of geological time, characterized and defined by us as humans being the main drivers of environmental change. So humans may alter not just our own rates of population growth, our own carrying capacities, but we can also exert effects on other species. So the biotic part of our environment, we can also, of course, exert effects on, say, the climate and other characteristics of the abiotic environment. But picking up first where we left off at the last lecture, we were talking about density-dependent and density-independent sort of environmental things that can make a population grow or shrink in size. And we talked about sort of intrinsic biological characteristics of a population. For example, why, all else being equal, a population of bacteria is probably going to be able to grow much more rapidly than a population of elephants. But the final factor I want to talk about, it's another of these sort of biological or intrinsic factors of a population, it's another of these factors that can affect whether or not a population grows and how rapidly it's likely to grow. And this has to do with the age structure of a population. So not so much for things like bacteria where individuals are, sort of show up and they're ready to reproduce. But in a lot of species, we have like a pre-reproductive period and often a post-reproductive period. And so the age structure of a population is often drawn just like sort of a pyramid-shaped diagram like this, with the number of individuals or the proportion of individuals in each of these different age classes. And so for humans, you see there's a very broad base of individuals that we might consider sort of pre-reproductive in blue. There's a bunch of reproductive aged individuals in green, and then the smallest, there's fewer individuals that are in the post-reproductive age classes. So, quick clicker question, if the age structure is like this, sort of a broad base, lots and lots of pre-reproductive individuals, a fair amount of reproductive aged individuals, how confident are we that this population is likely to grow in size? The age structure is like this. It's wide at the bottom, it's skinny at the top. Okay, let's take a look. Yeah, nice. I would agree. This type of age distribution is typically associated with a population that is going to grow quite fast in the future, because there's all sorts of individuals that will be moving into, as individuals move up this pyramid, they will be moving into the reproductive age classes. So populations with an age structure like this are likely to grow in the future. Here we go. And And sometimes the human population looks like this. So on the left we have, I think this is for Canada, the population of Canada in 1950. And you see there's a relatively broad base, and there's many the smaller proportions of individuals at these very old post-reproductive age classes. And indeed, in 1950, the Canadian population was growing and continued to do so for several decades. We can contrast that with the Canadian population a few years ago, and you see the proportion of individuals in these pre-reproductive age classes has decreased. And there's proportionately more individuals at the very top of the age pyramid. We are now an older population. There's more individuals of these older age classes and relatively fewer young individuals now in the 2020s, suggesting that, you know, in the absence of immigration, Canada is likely to actually shrink in population size. We would have negative population growth just based on rates of births and deaths. And this is just a cool little, you can go to StatsCan here, and it shows you the age structure of the Canadian population or other parts of the world if you want. And here's what it looked like, yeah, when I was a baby. Here's the baby boom sort of bulging out here, but it's characteristic of a population that's likely to continue to grow. And you can see how it has changed through the 2000s, the 2010s, and you can even predict into the future how the Canadian population is likely to grow or not based on our age structure. Now in humans, our age structure is affected by the per capita birth rate and the per capita death rate. I guess that's true in any population. That's going to affect the age structure. But in humans, we have an extra interesting wrinkle in that different human populations, or even the same human population at different points in time, might be characterized by different levels of economic development. And this model of economic development here just classifies populations into different stages and predicts things about the birth rate relative to the death rate, so the overall value of little r for the population, depending on what is sort of the level of development of that population, that country, or that point in time. And so, for example, we can think of pre-industrial societies as corresponding to, so maybe Europe in the Middle Ages is an example of a pre-industrial society. Or maybe modern day hunter-gatherer populations might be another example of a pre-industrial society. And these are characterized by, first of all, by a relatively high death rate. Okay, the per capita death rate, little d, tends to be pretty high in these pre-industrial societies because they don't have access to very good medicine, and so a lot of individuals are dying. Birth rates also tend to be quite high in these pre-industrial societies. And this could be either because the population just doesn't have access to birth control and family planning, or it could be something more cultural, like if 80% of your children are not going to survive to the age of 12, then maybe you're going to have a lot more children so that you have people remaining in your family. So birth rates are high and death rates are high. And so little r, which is of course just the birth rate minus the death rate, for pre-industrial populations, little r is pretty close to 0. It might be slightly positive, but it's not super high. Now what happens when populations move into what we can call the transitional stage of development? This would correspond to what we now call the developing world. Okay, people are starting to live in cities. They are not necessarily in hunter-gatherer societies, but they also are not, at the. They don't exactly have our modern day Western lifestyle either. So what happens then is that we typically first see a decrease in the death rate. So maybe there's improved ability to feed more people, and so fewer people are starving to death. Or maybe there's the development of antibiotic drugs and vaccines, or rates of infant mortality might decrease. And most people will buy into that. Most people will happily accept a decrease in the death rate. But it takes longer for there to be a decrease in the birth rate. And this is because, it just takes time for people to adjust to the fact that, oh, actually, most of my kids that I have are actually going to survive, and so maybe I don't need to have 10 kids. I could have just 2 or 3. It takes a while. There may be cultural factors and some resistance initially to uptake of birth control or family planning. And so for this reason, eventually in the transitional phase, both the birth rate and the death rate go down. But the death rate often goes down first. Historically, that is what we have seen. And so little r, the difference between these, can be very high. So this is where a lot of population growth happens in societies or countries with this particular developmental stage. And later on, so the third stage in this is, we in Canada and the United States are probably sort of late industrial stage here. This is where we are. So the death rate is low. Thank you, modern medicine. The birth rate is also pretty low. Thank you, contraception and family planning and education. And so little r is again getting pretty close to 0. And some countries will eventually move into this post-industrial stage in which, the death rate stays low, but the birth rate might become even lower than the death rate. And so some countries will eventually enter a stage of negative population growth. So if little r is negative, remember that the population is going to decrease in size. So this is just an overview of how the fact that we as humans also have cultural factors and economic development, and that can vary from time to time, and it can vary across different parts of the world. This can affect our predictions about which populations are going to grow and for how long, and which populations might actually shrink in size. It's something sort of more unique to humans. We would not see this in foxes or cabbage plants or something. Something weird about humans. Okay, but a quick clicker question. So I mentioned in the last class that for most of our history as humans, we have seen what looks a lot like exponential growth, or at least a pretty close approximation to this J-shaped curve that is described by exponential growth. So which of these, good old multiples, is a factor contributing to that continued growth? Just to get you back in the groove of thinking in a multiple kind of way. Always good to practice that. Okay, let's take a look. Nice, yeah, awesome. Yeah, A is the right answer here. Yes, we have expanded our geographic range relative to back when we all used to live in the eastern part of Africa. Yes, we have introduced agriculture, and what does this do? It increases carrying capacity, allowing us to continue to grow, approaching that carrying capacity. Yes, advances in public health have reduced the effect of disease. So nice. And yeah, and almost nobody fell for option 4. That's just like a little zinger to see if you remember what we learned about evolution, and no species being more highly evolved than anything else. Okay, nice. Okay, so the Anthropocene, Or how do humans affect other species first? How do humans affect other species? Because clearly, things we do affect our own species. We affect our own rates of per capita growth. We affect our own carrying capacity. It's probably not news to you that we are probably the dominant form of ecological effects now on the planet. In other words, humans have many big impacts on other living things. So, for example, we are great at extracting resources. That might be like fresh water, that might be through mining. We extract metals from the center of the earth or certain minerals or food. And we also have impacts on the environment. So air pollution, which contributes to an increase in greenhouse gases, which contributes to climate change. And these things, surprisingly, affect, not surprisingly, affect the environment. There's often people are interested in calculating their own carbon footprint, or like how much of an impact am I personally having on the environment. And people are interested maybe in reducing that. But we can also calculate the environmental impact of different types of populations. And so this idea is introduced in what we call the IPAT framework. The IPAT simply stands for impact, population size, affluence or wealthiness of a society, and technology. And so how much of an environmental impact are people living in Canada in 2025 having? What is our impact? Well, that is going to, yes, it's going to scale with population size. So everything else being equal, a large population is going to have more of an environmental impact than a small population, sure. So population size is in there. But affluence and also technology are also in there. And this reflects the fact that some populations or some individuals are likely to use more resources and have more of an environmental impact than others. So all else being equal, a larger population has more of an impact than a smaller population. But for two populations of similar size, typically the wealthier, more affluent population, where people are driving around in like SUVs or private jets or something, is going to have more of an effect on the environment, more of an impact than a less wealthy, less affluent population, or somewhere where they use different technologies. And to take that to an extreme, there's been a study, I think a few years ago, and maybe in 2019, maybe mid-pandemic, demonstrating that if you just consider the 50 wealthiest people on the planet, so they're all like the super billionaires, these individuals burn more fossil fuels in an hour and a half than the average person does in their whole lifetime. And so, yes, we can think about our individual carbon footprints, but it's also important maybe to razz the 1% about theirs, because some people have a very disproportionate effect on the environment. Okay, so what do humans do more generally? How do humans affect other species? Well, we're predators, so we can kill animals. Maybe we kill them for sport, or maybe we kill them, like these fish, for food, because we need to eat them. We are also, this predation puts us in competition with other species. And so this fishing haul, for example, obviously it affects population size of the fish that are going to be consumed by humans. It is also likely to affect the population size of other, say, marine mammals that would otherwise be eating the fish. So whales, for example. So food that is consumed by humans is not obviously going to be available for other species. So we're predators. We are competitors. Human activities also modify the landscape. And so we might change sort of a forest habitat and convert much of that to agricultural fields, like to grow crops. And we might convert some of it to, like this housing development here. Or we might modify an aquatic landscape and dam up a river so that we have a steady water source. Or we might use the dam to generate electricity. So there's various reasons why we might modify the landscape, and this is likely to affect the carrying capacity of other species that inhabit those areas. Our activities also affect the abiotic environment, in particular the climate. And so I think still in the labs and the skill sessions, you guys probably had one on climate change, yes? Okay, good. So this is not news to you. So activities like slash and burn, forestry practices, say in the Amazon basin, not only do they reduce the forested area, but they also contribute a lot of, put a lot of carbon in the atmosphere. So carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases become trapped in the Earth's atmosphere, and this can have effects on the Earth's climate. And these can be sort of knock-on effects. So there might be melting of the polar ice caps or the glaciers, and this can contribute to ocean levels rising, for example. So various things we do affect the abiotic environment, which in turn affects other species that live on the planet with us. We also have very direct effects on rates of population growth and population size of other species. So I said there's about 8 or so billion humans on the planet now. There's over 23 billion domestic chickens on the planet now. Chickens are like the most successful in terms of population size bird that there is. And in the absence of humans using, if we were not breeding chickens and using them as food and as a source of eggs, there's no way there would be this many chickens on the planet. So in this case, we have sort of artificially raised the population size of this one particular species because it is economically very useful to us. And this little infographic is really, really striking, I think. Do you guys know what biomass is? No, okay. But so the biomass of humans would be, we say, okay, there's 8 billion humans or so in the world, and the average mass or weight of a human person is whatever it is. And so the total weight of all, or mass of all the humans on the world is like the human biomass. But you could do the same for the total biomass of all the domesticated mammals in the world. And you could do the same for the total weight of all the wild mammals in the world. So this just considers mammals, but it's cool. Like humans, as we might expect, because there's so many of us, constitute I don't know, maybe about 40% of the mammalian biomass. And our domesticated animals, domesticated mammals, things like cows and sheep and pigs that we might use for food, or oxen that we might use to do work, or dogs and cats, things that we have domesticated and used as like companion animals. Most of the mammalian biomass is domestic animals that we have domesticated. And the smallest fraction of biomass among the mammals are wild mammals. So everything from mice to deer to elephants and whales. Only 6% of the total mass or weight of mammals on Earth is tied up in natural populations anymore. The rest is either us or our domesticated livestock. Okay. So what else do we do, as humans, I'm sort of painting humans with maybe sort of a dark brush, but a lot of humans are involved in conservation initiatives. And so, for example, there have been attempts to, so the peregrine falcon on the left, its population sizes became very, very low after DDT, the insecticide, was being used. Turned out to sort of poison birds, and so raptors like peregrine falcons were almost extirpated from the United States. These things were brought into a captive breeding program, and so they took peregrine falcons from the wild, the few remaining individuals there were, and they allowed them to breed in captivity under sort of safe conditions, protecting them from predators, making sure they weren't taking up poison food. And then they released the offspring of these individuals back into part of their ancestral range. And this is an example of a pretty successful conservation initiative. They were able to do captive breeding and then reintroduction. And the peregrine falcon population now is pretty stable, which is great. Sometimes captive breeding programs don't work as well, so there was a similar, there was another captive breeding initiative done with red wolves, which live, or at least used to live, in like the southeastern United States, and this reintroduction was, for various reasons, much less successful. So take-home message, sometimes we try to conserve, sometimes our conservation efforts are successful, and sometimes they are not. We also sometimes engage in biological control. So we might introduce a new species to an area in an effort to control or reduce the population size of some pest species. And so, yeah, how many people have heard of Australian cane toads? Yeah, okay. So these Australian cane toads are not actually native to Australia. They're actually from Central America. They were brought to Australia some time ago in an effort to control populations of this guy. So this is a sugarcane beetle that was eating. It was a pest to farmers in Australia who were trying to grow sugarcane crops. The beetles would come in and eat the sugarcane because it's delicious. And so they thought that they would bring in this frog from Central America, and the frog should eat the beetle, and then problem solved, right? Instead, it turns out these frogs can't actually eat the beetles. Like the beetles see the frogs, and they just crawl higher up the sugarcane and keep eating, and the frogs just flop around. But the frogs instead began eating native Australian insects. And so now the sugarcane beetle is still a pest in Australia, but a much bigger pest is this introduced cane toad. So it is, it's become a problem of its own. So this is a sort of an unsuccessful attempt at biological control. Some of you with cottages in cottage country around here may have lakes that are infested with this invasive plant, Eurasian milfoil. And some cottage associations are attempting to do biological control by dumping in these aquatic insects called weevils and hoping that the weevils will eat the milfoil. So this is another attempt at biological control. I don't know how well this is working. Maybe it's going to be successful, maybe it's not. Maybe we're just creating new problems. So another effect we have on other species. So to take a step back from human effects on other species now, we can classify any type of interspecific interaction. So between two populations, between members of two different species. We can classify them based on who benefits as a result of the interaction and who suffers or has a reduction in fitness as a result of the interaction. And we've sort of seen this type of classification already when we talked about social behavior, so behavior between two individuals that both belong to the same species. Remember, there's like cooperation and selfishness and spite and all that. So one type of interspecific interaction is what we call interactions between natural enemies. And examples of natural enemies would be predators and prey. So this predatory fungus is eating these little nematode worms here, predators and prey. Another set of natural enemies are herbivores and plants. So a beetle here is a herbivore. It is eating part of the leaf of some sort of tree. And another example of natural enemies would be interactions between a parasite and its host. So here's a COVID virion out on its way to find maybe a human to infect and to make them sick. Anyway, all of these types of interactions, whether it's predation or herbivory or parasitism, are characterized by one party benefits and the other party suffers as a result of the interaction. So the fungus is doing better because the worm is there. The fungus gets food. The bug also gets food. The COVID virion gets resources and a place to live. But the prey item, so this worm, or the host plant, or the host human, has a reduction in fitness. Maybe they're killed, maybe it just makes them a little bit sicker, or their leaves are kind of smaller and less useful now. But there's some sort of reduction. So this interaction between natural enemies is beneficial for one party, but not for the other. Another class of interaction is what we call competition. This happens when there are two species interact, or two species that both require the same type of resource. So maybe these two birds both require fish. They both feed on fish, and each of them is going to suffer as a result of the other species being present, because the more fish are eaten that get eaten by the cormorant, the fewer fish would be available for the other bird. So competition. Or in plants, trees in a forest might compete for access to sunlight or for soil moisture or nutrients in the soil. So in competition, each party has a lower fitness because the other species is there. Each player does not do as well as it would if it just had all these resources to itself. The flip side of that, sometimes interactions between species are mutually beneficial. Each species can benefit by interacting with the other. The sort of classic example of this is plant pollinator interactions. So an insect, or in this case a hummingbird, comes up to a plant and takes a big drink of nectar from the plant. So the animal benefits, it gets some food. But the plant also benefits because the animal has to come close enough so that it becomes coated in pollen, and then the next plant that it visits will transport some pollen from the first plant to the next plant. So this is how plants reproduce. This is how they get their gametes from one individual to another. So both parties benefit. We also have mutualisms with our gut bacteria. So there's many bacteria living on us, but also in us, including in our intestines. And a lot of those bacteria we have mutualistic interactions with. They can break down maybe some compounds in our food that we could not digest on our own. And this makes those nutrients and that energy available to us. It benefits us, but it also benefits the bacteria themselves, because they are also getting, a place to live and also access to some of these nutrients. So it's mutually beneficial. Now, sometimes two species might interact with each other, and maybe it affects the fitness of one species but not the other. And so one case of this is what we call a commensal interaction. Maybe one party benefits from the interaction, and the fitness of the other party neither increases nor decreases. So an example of this would be if you were walking through the forest and like a burr, a little sticky burr gets on your clothes, and you notice it a mile away and pick it off and throw it away. That plant that stuck the burr on you has just benefited from that interaction, because that is how it disperses its seeds. It relies on things walking by to get burrs stuck to them and then throw them away somewhere else. It's benefited. You haven't really lost any fitness, nor have you gained any fitness. This is a commensal interaction. The opposite of this, I guess, is an amensal interaction. So imagine now you're walking and you step on, a worm or a bug. Okay, so you've killed that bug that you stepped on. And so that decreases the fitness of the bug. But it doesn't really affect your fitness one way or the other, right? You don't benefit, you're not going to eat it. You're not, it doesn't reduce your fitness either. So this is sort of one of these asymmetric interactions that affect the fitness of one party but not the other. And a lot of the time, these interactions involve a symbiosis. Any of these interactions could involve a symbiosis. So sometimes one species is tiny or microscopic relative to the other. And so instead of like a lynx chasing a fox, maybe we have a little microbe that's tiny relative to you. So symbiotic interactions are interactions where one of the species lives either on or even inside the other organism. And these could include host-parasite relationships, like you and pathogenic bacteria or viruses. That's a symbiotic host-parasite relationship. They could be mutualistic relationships like we talked about with the gut bacteria, or they could be commensal relationships. There's probably all sorts of microbes on you right now that just don't affect your fitness either way, but they maybe benefit. That interaction is benefiting the fitness of the microbe. Yeah. Okay. So just a quick refresher. Which of these benefits both species involved? Okay. Nice. Okay. Yeah, amazing. All right, I don't need to belabor that anymore, except I do want to say a little bit about coevolution and coevolutionary arms races. So anytime we have two species that interact a lot with each other, that exert strong effects on one another's fitness, whether that's in the form of natural enemies or mutualists or hosted parasites, we can sometimes see both populations, both species, evolving to be better and better at dealing with the other. So this could take the form of selection on this herbivore to become faster and faster, evolving faster running speeds to become better at escaping from predators. But at the same time, selection on the predators, on this cheetah, I think it's a cheetah or a leopard, they might also be evolving faster and faster running speeds or becoming better and better at capturing prey. This is an example of an arms race or a case of coevolution. In this garter snake and newt example, there's a species of newt that is incredibly toxic. And it happens to be one of the most toxic animals on the planet, and if you eat one or even lick one, you would probably die. However, garter snakes have evolved the ability to eat these newts. And so that garter snakes have evolved better and better. Selection has favored improved detoxification ability of this poison. And this has put a selection pressure on the newts to become more and more toxic. And so these things are also in a coevolutionary arms race, again, between two natural enemies. And here's just another example of a coevolutionary arms race that actually occurs between mutualists. And so it's the case of a moth with a really, really long tongue. It's about 30 centimeters long, which is like the longest known tongue in an insect pollinator. And it is pollinating a plant, which is also unusual in having really, really, really long nectar spurs. And there seems to be this coevolution. Selection on the plants has, it's important to the plant that the moth come close enough to get coated with pollen. And so the plant makes its nectar tube deeper and deeper and deeper, so the moth has to come closer and closer. It's important to the moth that it is able to reach the nectar. And so selection on the moths has favored longer and longer and longer tongues. And so we see the coevolution of increasingly long tongues, but also increasingly long nectar spurs to this ridiculous extent. So arms races can happen even between mutualists. Okay, so many clicker questions today. Which of these, knowing what you do now about interspecific interactions, which of these 4 would you think is least likely to result in coevolution, in each party adapting to the other? So in coevolution, both species are evolving to become better and better at dealing with the other. Okay. Yes. Okay, commensalism, good. Yeah, there might be selection on one party, but not on the other party. So commensalism is least likely to result in coevolution. Okay, so the Anthropocene. 9 minutes to talk about the Anthropocene. I haven't left myself much time. If you Google, like, what does a food web look like? What is a food web? You will almost always get something kind of like this. It usually doesn't include humans. But that is unrealistic. Humans are actually, I think, connected to just about all of the food webs in the world. And typically our position in any food web is the position of a super predator. So in the aquatic food web, what would normally be the top predators in this web, so things like blue herons or musky fish, these large-bodied fish, any of these can be killed and often are killed by humans. So humans are part of the food web, part of the ecosystem. And humans are increasingly having effects on ecosystems. What is an ecosystem? Simply, it's all the organisms, all the species that live in an area, plus their physical environment. Lots of activities by humans are shaping ecosystems, and one of the ways in which we are affecting our physical environment is by laying down what we call technofossils. So just trash, basically, or things that we have made, things like our highway systems and concrete or laptops and electronic waste that we throw away. These will eventually be visible in the geologic layer, assuming that there are paleontologists like 1 million years from now that come down and investigate the geology, the rock layers that are being laid down now. There will be evidence of us in those layers. So these human-made artifacts, we can call them technofossils. We're having massive effects on the climate and on levels of sea ice and on ocean levels of carbon dioxide. Acidification in the oceans is increasing. So lots of environmental change, and for these reasons, because of the magnitude of this environmental change, and also because every other geological period is defined either by a mass extinction event and or by a big environmental change. Some people have hypothesized that maybe we are at the end of the Holocene period, And we should really consider ourselves as being starting a new geological period now, the Anthropocene. And by Anthropocene, I mean a period of geological history where humans are the main drivers of environmental change. So the idea is that the Anthropocene is a new geological period. When did it start? Maybe around the time of the Industrial Revolution or a little bit sooner. Maybe around the 1950s when we started nuclear testing, and isotopes from that will be detectable in fossil strata. Human activities are now fundamentally changing ecosystems and climate on Earth. And so what's the evidence consistent with us being in a new geological period? Yes, the climate is certainly changing, and that is often associated with the end of one period and the start of another geological period. There will be geological or other signals in the form of isotopes from nuclear testing and technofossils. And there's also at least some evidence that a sixth mass extinction event seems to be getting started. And so, again, all of these sort of markers between major geological periods are associated either with a mass extinction event, like here's the mass extinction event that was associated with the death of the dinosaurs, and or with a period of sudden environmental change. So are we in the middle of a sixth, or getting started on a sixth mass extinction event? It's hard to say. We don't know for sure yet, but it is true that all of these species of or types of vertebrate animals, modern day extinction levels are well above background level. So we would always expect some proportion of species going extinct during any period of time, but extinction levels are much higher now than sort of background levels. And this is largely due to various human activities. So a clicker question: how are we going to describe the Anthropocene? Maybe the fact that we now realize that extinction levels are rising and the climate is changing, maybe this is an opportunity for us to turn things around. Or maybe this is inevitable. Let's see what you guys think. Maybe the way in which we affect the environment is definitely going to be negative. Or maybe it's not. No right answer to the, well, I know what I think the right answer is. Okay, I think that this is the right answer, that the technofossils for sure are going to make the Anthropocene identifiable. I hope that the answer is not C. I think it could be known as a period of predominantly negative impacts. Maybe we can still turn things around. So I would agree that we as humans now seem to be the main drivers of environmental change. For most of our history, we have improved, say, the lifespan and quality of life for humans over time, but usually at the cost of environmental degradation. So all the advances of, say, the Industrial Revolution or of agriculture, these have had environmental impacts. I think we are probably now at the point where we can't have continued improvements in human well-being unless we also start to restore environmental impacts. And so we may be at a tipping point where maybe we'll end up with both human well-being continuing to improve, but also environmental quality being maintained. Or maybe we'll end up at this dystopian future. I just want to end with a recommendation for a paper you may want to read later on. I like this paper because it's written by a number of early career Canadian researchers, and they point out that in order to promote, to have this good Anthropocene, we can't have just biologists working in isolation. We need cooperation. So you guys should go out and talk to your friends taking poli-sci or philosophy or law or sociology or ethics. So, yeah, don't worry about these One Health slides. I will just say good luck, not only with the final exam, but also good luck with the Anthropocene. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.